really at that point, separate himself a bit like Fiddler on the Roof from the tradition. And from that point on, one of the main themes of his life is going to be that tension between the desire for piousness and a celebration of this. At that point, it wasn't an old way of life. It still felt like the way of life of traditional Judaism in Eastern Europe, and emancipation and modernism and the future. And for his whole life, he embodied that dichotomy and struggled with it in different ways. So he moved to Warsaw. There we go, got it. All right, now let me move to Warsaw. There we go. Moved to Warsaw in 1900. And at that point, he became Y.L. Peretz's, who was at the older generation towering figure in Yiddish, the big champion of making Yiddish the language for Jewish literature, with Sholem Asch. And so he and Peretz had a small number of promising Yiddish writers under his wing, and very quickly Sholem Asch became his primary protege. So they became very close, and Peretz really supported him very strongly. Peretz features in Indecent in the play. So Asch, at this point, he's quite young. He's 20 years old, starts publishing in 1900 in Yiddish, stories, prose poems, a couple of plays. And then in 1914, when World War I broke out, he flees Europe and comes to the United States for the first time. And he actually spent a little time in Paris first. I mean, he traveled all over the place. And from that point on, the United States became an on and off, but central location for him. He, in 1920, got citizenship in the United States and spent most of the rest of his life in the US. But then after World War I ended, he went back to visit the Ukraine primarily, and Poland, and throughout the rest of Europe, and saw really already at that point how the conditions for Jews had gotten so much worse than just the decade before when he left, and was utterly crushed and horrified, and clearly had a prescient sense of what was coming with the Nazi era and with the Holocaust. So when he returned, he was really crushed, really devastated, and that too is captured in Indecent. We see that. All right, so his creative work divides into three phases. The earliest phase, from 1900 to 1920, he wrote a series of novels, stories, and plays that, as I said, focused on that conflict between devotion and emancipation in small European towns and shtetls. So again, like Sholem Aleichem, the setting of these plays is in Eastern Europe. They're, of course, written in Yiddish. Some of these plays really idealize that lifestyle, have a very nostalgic view of the lifestyle. Others really show the darker sides and the tensions, and he was not afraid, as in God of Vengeance, to get into, to show the dirty laundry, which became a source of controversy. But the whole focus was on that world. And God of Vengeance is very much of that period. Then just again, for context, we won't be focusing on this, but the Sholem Asch in Indecent, in the later scenes, the play had been in his childhood, this God of Vengeance, and he's already moved on to these later phases. So his second phase, from 1920 to 1943, focuses on the struggles of Jewish immigrants in the United States. And then finally, probably God of Vengeance was tremendously controversial, as we'll discuss, but the most controversial part of his career was actually not even God of Vengeance. From 1943 to 1955, he turned his attention to Christianity. And he really wanted to eliminate the divide between Christianity and Judaism, and to show, in his view, the figure of Christ was represented most perfectly by the Jewish people as martyrs. He wasn't like a Jewish believer. He didn't become Christian, but he was fascinated by Christianity, and he believed that Christianity well, it was rooted in Judaism, what he called true Christianity. He felt that it had been much Christianity had gone against its basic tenets of love and acceptance and so forth. And so he writes a series of books, the first one being called Nazareth, about Jesus, focusing on Jesus as a Jewish man, and then one on Mary. And these books were, within the Jewish community in particular, incredibly controversial. So he had, in the United States, been, as I said, an incredibly prominent spokesperson. He wrote for the Forward, Vorwärts, which many of us in the congregation are very familiar with. Abe Cohen, in his final book, writes a book criticizing Asch for this new Christological, as they called it, turn in his writing. The Forward he was actually on the salaried in the Forward and wrote a lot of his stuff was published in the Forward. They stopped publishing his stuff. And he was basically censored by the Jewish community for these works. And so then the very last phase of his life, he turned away from that. All right, so we're going back though to God of Vengeance, which is in that first period. And that is a picture of the original lead actor in God of Vengeance. So God of Vengeance, to give it some context, as I said, it was written in 1906. So what was happening in 1906? How would this guy, Sholem Asch, write this play with all of these scandalous elements to it? So just to put this in a little bit of context, this is the era of naturalism. So actually the peak of naturalism is the very end of the 19th century. So by 1906, if he's reading in German, all of the great works of modern literature at that point, that would have been Ibsen, Strindberg, Chekhov. And in particular, he was deeply influenced by, there was George Bernard Shaw in English, Mrs. Warren's Profession, that famously was about a prostitute. And in typical scandalous George Bernard Shaw style, he's very sympathetic towards this prostitute, which he sees as simply another kind of business. Gorky's The Lower Depths, which was an incredibly popular, every naturalist theater would start their season with The Lower Depths. And as you can see, that takes place in a flop house among deeply impoverished people. And then probably most similarly, Henrik Ibsen's works that are unflinching in looking at controversies in a completely undogmatic way. He would write one play and then write a response to it in the next play and really explore different perspectives. But specifically, the play Ghosts was the most controversial. Some of you may know it's about syphilis, which was not something you talked about on the stage at that time. So these were the works that really inspired Asch. He was just completely part and parcel of this movement when he wrote God of Vengeance. It was no more shocking than these works. He was simply part of this modern naturalist context. So God of Vengeance, what is the play about? So the play is about this brothel owner named Yankel, and you saw the picture of the first actor who played that part. It's one of actually the great parts in modern drama, though the play has been rarely performed, but it's a really towering part. And he lives in an apartment over his brothel. And his wife, Sarah, used to be a prostitute, and he married her, and she's no longer a prostitute, but they still work in the brothel. But he wants to have a respectable life. He feels himself to be deeply pious despite his lifestyle. And so he's decided to try to live that life through his daughter, Rivka, which in Indecent, they always call it Rivkala, little Rivka, but in the original play, it's Rivka. So he's raised her to be pure, to be pious, to be virginal. He has the rule to never, ever go into the brothel. Don't go downstairs. Don't let anybody from the downstairs come upstairs. And he has, at the beginning of the play, hired a Torah scribe to create a Torah for his family. And he's saying, of course, most people in town, most pious people would not even talk to him, even though he's very wealthy. But this scribe has agreed to do it for a fee, and his daughter is going to be, he said, I wouldn't touch it, I wouldn't deal with it, but my daughter is going to be worthy of reading from this Torah, and she's going to get married to a pious person, and this will be her dowry. So this is the beginning of the next generation. Rivka, however, who is an incredibly pure and innocent and wonderful person, is intrigued by what's happening downstairs, doesn't entirely understand the nature of the business, and has befriended one of the prostitutes, Manka, and in fact, they become very close and then fall in love with each other. And not that she initially understands even what's going on or what that means, but they form this really intense and really beautiful relationship with each other. So the play ends with Yankel, the scribe is there. Rivka comes back after a night out with Manka in the rain, and we see it's actually, this is Act 2 of the play, and it's this beautiful love scene, incredibly poetic. And so he's horrified, and he asks her, "Have you lost your virginity?" And she says, "I don't know." And he gets incredibly furious, and he evicts both Sarah, who's trying to defend her daughter, and Rivka to the brothel downstairs. And he takes the Torah, and the play ends with him raising it up as if about to throw the Torah down the stairs, which was actually the most controversial part of the play among the Jewish community, even though it wasn't a real Torah, of course, and he doesn't even throw it, he just does that. But still, that gesture. But obviously for Sholem Asch, that's that sign that this attempt to break out of this life to find something pious is totally failed, and this character ends in absolute despair, sort of King Lear-like, this horrible tragedy. So that is God of Vengeance. So the production history, he wrote the play at the age of 26. And by the way, there's a short reference in the play. He says, "This is my first play," which is poetic license. It was actually his third play. But that's okay. I mean, and I'm sure Paula Vogel was very, very well over that. She also, in the arrest scene, she has the cast arrested in the Broadway production opening night. It was actually 6 weeks after opening night. And I've heard interviews, she's totally aware of that. It's obviously more dramatic and interesting to do it on opening night. But in any case, but this was, his first two plays actually were produced and were reasonably successful. This one was hugely successful. This is what really made his name, particularly in theater. So 1907, his third play, this 26-year-old guy sends his play to Max Reinhardt's theater. And some of you may know, Max Reinhardt was the most prestigious producer-director in Germany. He did a very famous Midsummer Night's Dream and all sorts of things on film that some of you might have seen. Huge. I mean, this is like major. And Reinhardt produces God of Vengeance, and Rudolf Scheidkraut, who's that picture that you saw, was one of the most famous actors. He was like, the Dustin Hoffman or whatever or the Meryl Streep of Germany. Was Reinhardt Jewish? No, I don't think he was Jewish. And he didn't direct the show, he produced the show. Yeah, most of the productions actually were not, they were translated in different languages and they weren't done by Jews, except for his own troupe, Asch's own troupe. But Scheidkraut then took this part on, and for the next, he's a main character in this play. He came to the United States and performed it. He was in the Broadway production. He performed it all over the world with that original troupe. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, this was really the first Yiddish play to be translated and performed throughout Europe. It was translated into Polish, Hebrew, Italian, French, Dutch, Czech, Swedish, and Norwegian in exactly the same way that Ibsen's works and Gorky's works and Chekhov's works were. It was part of this international avant-garde. So very, very prestigious. And indeed, many historians and theater scholars say he was on the verge of really, he would have been in the canon. He would be, when we talk about great drama, we talk about Ibsen and Strindberg and Chekhov. It would have been And Asch if it weren't for this scandal in the United States and the play being canceled. And then that play left the canon and he gave up on theater after that, understandably. So then in 1918, the play goes to New York and it's performed in Yiddish on the Lower East Side, and again is very successful. Then it actually moves It's translated into English in 1922 and moves to the Provincetown Theater, one of the real major where Eugene O'Neill's plays were produced, and very important theater company, and was very popular there. There was very little, there was always whiffs of controversy, but for the most part, sold out, incredibly popular. So it wasn't until it moves upstage to Broadway, to the Apollo Theater, that the trouble begins. So the trouble, the obscenity trial. So here's a quote from Sholem Asch as the play depicts. At this point, by 1923, Asch, remember, he'd come back from that trip to Eastern Europe and was incredibly demoralized, and actually was beginning to doubt the big criticism about his play, really up to this point from the Jewish community, was that it was representing Jews as pimps and prostitutes, and that with the anti-Semitism in the world, you wanted positive representations of Jews. And he said, why? I've written all these positive representations of Jews, but there are good Jews and there are bad Jews, there are in-between Jews, and I'm talking about the truth. So he, in fact, was not altogether sure that he still supported the play. I mean, he was beginning to have doubts. So when the cast was arrested 6 weeks into the Broadway run, the entire cast, they waited till after the performance, and then this Irish policeman, takes the whole cast and the producer, but not Asch. They didn't arrest him, interestingly. They arrest them all. Eventually, they are all convicted, and then eventually after that, it's appealed, and the verdict is overturned. The UCLA, the ACLU, interestingly, declined to take the case because they said that there's always been the right for people to object to things on the basis of obscenity and indecency. But there were many, many incredibly prominent writers and intellectuals in New York who adamantly came to the play's defense and said, this is not immoral at all. This is the most moral play being performed in New York right now. So Asch didn't actually go to the trial, partly because I think he was depressed. I mean, he just could not face people, and partly because he just wasn't sure. But he wrote a very passionate statement that was read. And from that statement, he said, I was not concerned whether I wrote a moral or immoral play. What I wanted to write was an artistic play and a true one. In the 17 years it's been before the public, this is the first time I've had to defend it. And he sounds there actually very, very much like Ibsen. Ibsen made exactly the same statements when people would say, we love you, you're such a great political radical feminist for writing a dollhouse. He would say, I'm not in anything. I don't believe in movements. I'm just trying to write the truth. And I empathize with everybody and everybody's humanity. A humanist, and Asch was very much like that. He was not trying to create a scandal at all. And he certainly wasn't trying to be shocking or immoral. He was just trying to be truthful. On the other hand, the primary critic of this play who really provoked the arrest was Rabbi Joseph Silverman, who, from my research, says he was actually the leading Reform rabbi of the time. Is that a reasonable thing? I asked our rabbi. I have no connection to it. No connection to him? Yeah, he's passed. But anyway, but it's significant. It was a Reform rabbi, no less. But it was part of that, his argument was, this is creating a bad image of the Jews. We need to present positive images of the Jews. And his speech following the arrest is in Indecent. Vogel takes the transcript from it. And the judge ruled, drama must be purified of Eastern exoticism, its sexual pollution, and its corruptive attitude towards the family. So again, very, very puritanical. But as I said, many, many prominent figures came to the defense, and Paula Vogel makes Eugene O'Neill a character in the play. And so we see some of his response to that as well. So really, this event becomes this incredible mirror of America at that time. America Jewry in particular, but even more broadly, the artistic issues in America. All right, so that is God of Vengeance. God of Vengeance had, after that Broadway debacle, been occasionally revived over the years, but not very often. It really was erased from the canon. It's not anthologized in any great books of modern drama. And you would often see people saying, this is a neglected, I mean, people writing about Asch, this is a neglected masterpiece. We need to do that. We need to revive it. It speaks just as relevantly today as ever. Paula Vogel, some of you may know of her. She's one of the most successful, prominent, respected playwrights today. She was born in 1951. And in 1998, she won the Pulitzer Prize for Drama for the play How I Learned to Drive. And she talks about how when she was a graduate student, and since then she's had an incredibly illustrious career, both as a playwright and as an academic. She taught at Yale, and she's influenced whole generations of writers. But when she herself was a graduate student, she just came out as a lesbian, and she was Jewish. And so her theater history teacher said, you really need to read this play by Sholem Asch, God of Vengeance. And she'd never heard of it. Almost nobody had at that point. So she goes to the library, she looks it up, and she reads the first act, which is in the brothel with the brothel owner. And she said, okay, this is good. This is a really good, solid play. Yeah, sort of like Ibsen or whatever, neat. Then she gets to the second act, which is where the lesbian relationship comes in, and her jaw drops. And she still says to this day, it is the most beautiful lesbian love scene she's ever read in her life, written by this straight Jew, a male. And it's still fascinating. How did he come to have that kind of sensitivity? And again, I think he doesn't really talk about it, but I think, again, it's very much like Ibsen. How did Ibsen write one of the great feminist plays in history, A Dollhouse, through this tremendous empathy and this, conviction of everybody's humanity, and this refusal, again, like Chekhov as well, to judge and to be a moralist, to accept people as they are. So she fell in love with the play at that point. So that had been in her mind. So the play Indecent came about when Rebecca Tachman, who's the director, who won a Tony for the production. Actually, Paula Vogel didn't win a Tony for this particular show, but the director did, and totally deserved it because it's an amazing production. So she actually called Paula Vogel and said, I want to play about the obscenity trial. Originally, that was the idea, that it was just going to be about the obscenity trial. And Vogel said, wow, I love God of Vengeance. Actually, I think we've got a much bigger thing than this. I want it to be about the whole history, about this whole thing. And so, of course, Tachman said, absolutely, that sounds really cool. So the play really was born of this really close collaboration between Tachman and Paula Vogel. And in fact, she very quickly then lined up a bunch of actors, and they started working early on workshops, and most of those stayed with the production right up until its debut. And then also very, very early on, Paula Vogel decided that music was going to be key. This was just a strong intuition. There was no sort of intellectual argument for it, but it's like, that has to be key. So she herself, from very early on, the very first stages of writing, found songs corresponding, Yiddish music corresponding to each period that she was writing about in the play, and really wrote that with the music in mind. So the music is integral. And that's one of the beautiful things about the play. That's why those of you that just read it, I very, very, very strongly urge you to see it. And it is streaming on Amazon Prime, so you can see the whole thing. And it's a beautiful documentation of, it's not a film, it's a documentation of the stage production, and it does a really beautiful job. I'm going to show just the first 2 minutes of it a little bit later. But the music is just, and also if you just want to listen to wonderful music, it's not as amazing as our local klezmer band, but it is, but it is on Apple Music, and it's just Yiddish music, but it doesn't sound, it's not a musical. These are all pre-existing songs, but the cast and particularly the musicians are mind-bogglingly wonderful. So the show premieres in 2015 in a joint production with the Yale Rep and La Jolla Playhouse in San Diego. So it actually performs in October at the Yale Rep, in November at La Jolla, and then it opened in Broadway in 2017 to incredibly rave reviews. So what I'm going to do now is play just, the whole thing is amazing, but I think the very beginning of the play gives you a feeling for the theatricality of it. So the way that she wrote this play, and again, this was also Tachman. This was, I think, equally the two of them. The focus of the character of the play are actually the original troupe of actors that Asch developed around himself initially in Warsaw, in Poland. and then stayed with the play and then came to the United States. And most of them, as I said, stayed with the production. So it's following them. And the play begins with them coming back to life as ghosts in this beautiful poetic moment where they've got sand coming out of their sleeves. And then they tell the whole story. And each of the cast members plays multiple characters. And it's really beautiful. It's really a virtuosic performance too, because like the person who plays the original actress in Yiddish who plays Rivka, she's kicked out of the part when it comes to Broadway because she can't speak English well enough. And so this very, very American, she's Vassar or Smith, I think Smith. But anyway, this this Seven Sisters College, I want to shock my parents. This is really great. Totally different character, it's very sweet and a very sympathetic character, but she just embodies these completely different characters. And all of them do that. And one kind of interesting thing, the actor who plays Perez is the older actor in the first scene. And then there's another actor who plays Sholem Asch throughout the entire play until the very last scene when he's an old man and a young writer comes to visit him to get permission to produce God of Vengeance, which Asch does not allow. So they have the older actor who played Perez play Sholem Asch, and then the actor who'd been playing Asch throughout the whole play up to that point plays the young writer. So they're very creative and inventive with the casting. So you're going to see that in this clip. They're introducing the cast and introducing the musicians who are integral to the whole action. They're in there. They're in among the actors. They move around. They're really acting along with the performers, the actors. All right. So hopefully it's kind of dark. So I'm hoping you will be able to see it. Is there a way to turn the lights? Yeah. Still getting the sound? I think this might be coming from my computer. Are you?
Oh yeah, you have to change it to press run.
I thought I had done that already. All right. Sorry, I will start that again so you can actually hear. I'll start it from where it is. So now, since you turned it up, the sound is probably going to be incredibly loud.
Ladies, gentlemen, our actors who play the leading role tonight. First, the founding members of our troupe, Vera Kornisky and Otto Godowski. They play all of the fathers, all of the mothers, the sagest of our characters, or the ones who remain fools at any age. And the members of our troupe in their prime, Alina Segensky, Mendel Schultz, they play all of the bands, all of the vice, the stars, the schemers, the Russians. The writers, the socialists, so ardent in their beliefs, so passionate in their work making. And finally, Meyer Olson. And on the podium, Mr. Maurice Godowski. Lemon. You can also call me Lou. I am the stage manager tonight. Usually you can find me backstage. We have a story we want to tell you about a play that changed my life. Every night we tell this story, but somehow I can never remember the end. Mother, I can't remember how it begins.
Okay. All right, and so ends my presentation with the beginning, and I hand it over. Let me stop sharing.
All right, thanks, David. Oh, thank you, David. That was absolutely wonderful. And I'm sure many of us are going to go home and turn on Amazon very, very shortly. It's a pleasure to introduce Renee Malso to lead a discussion along with Lizzie Zuckersalt, who will be helping to moderate. Renee was born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and she graduated from the first experimental high school in the country, which was run entirely by students. She has a bachelor's degree in English from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. She joined the Friends of the local library and became a board member there in East Troy, Michigan. East Troy, Wisconsin, thank you. I knew that didn't sound right. And she's been a participant and facilitator of book clubs for the past 25 years, and currently a member of 3 book clubs, Book and Anash being one of them. She moved to Athens from Wisconsin in 2020 to be with her incredibly brilliant and handsome son-in-law. I can't believe you wrote that, Renee. And of course, I know her best as my mother-in-law and the grandmother of Aaron, and she's a wonderful addition to our CCI community. And it's a pleasure to invite Renee to the Bima.
I just want to say thank you so much. I learned so much, and I'm sure we all did. Oh, hello. I guess I would like to know what people's, has anyone in here read the play? I mean, can you, so how did you like it? And I'd like to ask the people at home, what were your impressions of the play? And if you text it in chat, Lizzie will read it. I guess I'll start with me. I was just floored by the subject matter being written in 1906. It just floored me. And the fact that it was written by a Jewish man. And it made me so proud of how forward thinking we are. And also how accepting, not all of us, but some of us are. It just made me very, very proud and so surprised. And I loved it. I loved every minute of reading it. I highly recommend it to you guys. Any questions at home or?
I am not getting questions, which is very surprising. I don't have any chat. I don't have anyone to record, but maybe you can just talk to the brains.
Well, this is the first time I've been made aware of it, which is really great. And I'd like Rabbi said, I can't wait to go home and start exploring this. So this has been awesome. It's very good.
It's also available. I mean, I downloaded it to my Kindle, so it's available as a play. Yeah, yes, yes, you can.
Now, when you download it, is it as audio?
No, it didn't. Yeah, I was just reading the play Indecent.
Okay.
Yeah. So you're talking about how you can see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can see that it's at Amazon Prime.
Can you see God of Vengeance as well?
I am not aware of any. There's a short silent movie of God of Vengeance, but you can see clips and lots of reviews of, because they actually revived the play a couple of times after Indecent happened, much to Paula Vogel's delight. She really loved the fact that people could see both. So there have been stage productions, but none of them have been videoed.
I found it so surprising that it was successful in Europe without major controversy. I would think at the time it would be extremely controversial. And that had played in the US in English without controversy. I mean, wasn't there any controversy before it got?
There was, as I said, there was some, but mostly within the Jewish community because of the representation of Jews as pimps and brothels.
Can they hear you? Can you hear him speak at home?
I don't know.
Yes, okay.
Don't worry about that. You can't share my-
Gina's shaking her head. Okay, I'm sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead.
No.
You can repeat what he says, I guess.
Do you want to sit?
So,
Or I would say the suggestion coming up.
yeah, as is represented in the play, Peretz did not like that event. Loved Asch, supported him, but thought that he should burn the manuscript. That's in the play, and that's true. But again, not because of the sexuality in the play, but because of the impiousness and having a negative representation of Jews.
Maybe if you open up the chat, or maybe if you open the chat room for her, you'll see a couple of questions there that are coming in.
Oh, yeah, 11 of them.
One of them I think is interesting is that somebody who's not, I think, that used to maybe reading plays, is saying it was hard to read because of the Yiddish and the songs, but to kind of keep track of what was happening without seeing why. Can you address that in terms of what the intention is?
Yeah, I think it's always a challenge to read plays, but this one in particular is a huge challenge to read.
Yeah.
And that's why I strongly urge you to watch the video on Amazon Prime.
I can't read that
Was
question.
it acted straight through, or was there an intermission? If you could repeat my question, too, for example.
Okay.
I think that there was an intermission, but I honestly don't remember.
You were there.
I know, I was there.
One thing that occurred to me, just kind of thinking in modern times, is this business of Jews being concerned how they are portrayed is not limited to any one time in history. I mean, I think right now there is a very lively debate in that area, specifically to Israel.
Mhm.
So there are those who think, well, there are so many people that hate Israel that we can only say good things about Israel or portray Israel in a positive light. And then there are people like, I'm blanking on the playwright's name.
Asch.
Thank you. Who say, well, I'm just telling, quote unquote, the truth. That I just think that tension is so part of who we are and human nature
Mhm.
also.
Did you people at home, could you hear Rabbi's remarks?
Probably not.
Oh, well, forgive me for trying to, the rabbi was surprised. He was interested to see how many, I'm sorry, would you say it? I can't.
Well, he was emphasizing that, in fact, that concern with how to represent Jews and representing them in a positive way has been a constant throughout a lot of history, and in particular is now, you see that with representations of Israel and public discussions of Israel.
Oh, yes.
Did the play start up again on Broadway?
No, it's closed at this point.
No, it didn't start up again.
No, it had closed before the pandemic.
A week before.
Yeah.
I have a question. How common was it for Jews to run brothels? That shocked me too.
I'm certain it happened. I mean, remember, Asch was talking from his experience living in Poland.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I believe him.
I know that happening, actually, I was doing some research,
Oh.
listening to YouTube's. Apparently, in Buenos Aires, there were so many Jewish brothel owners, they had their own synagogue. So that's a big condominium, is that crazy? So that's apparently a way to make a living, I guess.
So perm shield waiting to.
Oh, that's how.
Lizzie just said that there were so many brothels in Buenos Aires that they had their own synagogue. And what?
There's some good questions.
Okay.
Let's see. You want to start with Dina's there, I guess, the moving uptown one, and then there's some others.
I can't see that one.
It's probably easier, Lizzie, if you.
Okay, I just didn't want to,
What?
You can't
Can
see
you stretch the window for her? So she can see all the
The only one I can see is God of, why would, I can't see Dina's.
After Elizabeth Bernstein has the PDF one, and there's Dina's one about, when they move uptown, it was a typical for something that might be popular in the Yiddish Lower Side to then not do well with an uptown audience.
No, it was very unusual. I mean,
Okay.
that was one of the remarkable things about Sholem Asch is he was really one of the first, if not the first, Yiddish writer whose works crossed over. And then the cast was amazing. I mean, he had a real stellar cast on Broadway to perform it. So it really was a big deal production. And then there weren't many after that.
In the play, Peretz in the Salon rejects Asch for showing Jews looking badly, i.e. brothel owners. Was that accurate or Vogel's poetic license?
That was completely accurate.
Ah.
Yeah, he actually did suggest that Asch burn the manuscript.
Oh.
He loved Asch. He was very supportive of Asch, but did not like God of Vengeance.
Did he not like it because of the lesbianism or because of the?
No, actually, it was really, the brothel part.
Okay.
Yeah, they didn't really emphasize the lesbianism.
Wow. So Suzanne asks, why was the Asch play called God of Vengeance?
Good question. That was at the end of the play, that was the protagonist when he turns against God and wants to throw the Torah. He talks about this vengeful, the God of vengeance. God will not accept him, and so he's going to reject God.
Okay. Oh, what was the view of homosexuality in Europe versus America at the time? Were attitudes towards lesbians different than male homosexuality?
Well, certainly in England, and Sholem Asch did spend some time living in London as well, and that was like the big issue there as well. Because as you know, until the late 60s, homosexuality was outlawed. But the focus really was male homosexuality.
Mm-hmm.
So in general, lesbianism was pretty common in the 19th century and usually just not spoken about. It wasn't really acknowledged. And even in this play, there's the kiss, and there's the affection between the two of them. But I think that question at the end, are you still a virgin? I don't know, sort of captures the sense of we're not really quite sure if this really does, how to categorize this.
Yeah, right.
So.
Yeah. Let's see. The reaction to the lesbian scene was mainly in American theater. That's someone is commenting about
Mhm.
Yeah,
that.
but I think she's meaning like, in Europe, it was okay, but when it got here.
Yes.
But even there, only when it moved to Broadway. So the Greenwich Village crowd was fine with it. And then the Broadway crowd, there they did make allusions, as you saw, to general immorality and sexual depravity. But there it was more the focus on, as a lot of the rhetoric today too, the family that is challenging the family, the traditional family.
Did they ever resume the 1923 play after the case was over?
Nope. And it wasn't produced again for a very long time. It's almost never until
I'm unmuted, so everyone should be able to hear me. Was there any sense that the arrests weren't necessarily about this play, but something like that it was directed because it was a Jewish play and, hints of anti-Semitism?
one of like 4 or 5 plays by Jews that same season, and the others were all warmly received and accepted. And they depicted these very sentimentalized Jewish characters. So it really was about, and as I said, it's Silverman, it's a rabbi that initiated the arrest. So it didn't seem to be direct anti-Semitism, except in the sense that Jews shouldn't be represented as full 3-dimensional human beings. And they should just be represented as stereotypes. But most of the Jews in these other plays, you had either the young assimilated Jew who was just like an American, and that was, I think, at that point, really, the melting pot, we can accept Jews, they're completely part of our culture. And then the father figures who had the thick Yiddish accents and were the typical stage Jewish caricature. Those were the two acceptable representations. And this was neither of those.
Lizzie comments, when Paula Vogel first read God of Vengeance, it was an out-of-print copy, one of a few surviving. Well, we're glad it's back.
It was in the Beinecke Rare Book Library.
Oh, how
She actually did a
interesting.
lot of her research in the Beinecke for this. I mean, she did a lot of great archival research.
Was the father in the original play, was the father's rage based on her being sexually active, period, or was it based on the lesbianism or both?
It's really both. The question, I mean, it's primarily actually the sexually active. He would have, his question is, are you still a virgin? So if she had had sex with a man, he would have thrown the Torah. He would have had exactly the same reaction.
So it was not homophobia as much as it was premature.
In his case, absolutely. And so if anything, and this is something that Paula Vogel sees in the play, and I see it too, that relationship is seen as incredibly pure and beautiful. So it isn't like she has an affair with a customer in the brothel, right?
Can you talk to the technical virtuosity of Vogel's meshing of the old play and her new play?
Yeah, it was, she talks about the challenge of providing enough of the old play, the God of Vengeance, so that if you haven't read it, which she knows almost nobody would have, you get a flavor for it, you know what it's about, but still have the majority of what you hear, her own language, and to have the taste of Yiddish, but to hear most of what you have is in English. And I think she did a really, really brilliant job of it. I think one thing that's really beautiful is the way the play is presented autochronological order. So it isn't like we see the whole play one scene at a time. And like that the montage sequence where they're playing when they're doing their tour all around the world, and they're doing exactly that same moment at the end of the play, those two lines over and over and over again in different places, and it says it's just beautifully done. And she very deliberately, she keeps pouring around the rain scene, and as the play gets on, it sort of builds that sense, and we get the language leading up to the kiss and that romance, but doesn't actually depict that scene until the very, very end. And that's, of course, in Act 2. So that becomes the climax of the play, is that moment that had resonated the most deeply with her.
Yeah. Does anyone have any more comments or questions here?
One more
Oh,
minute.
Lizzie. Oh, well, Dina's asked, do you know whether the inclusion of the concentration camp was added after discussion?
The whole process was really very much what we call devised theater, even though Paula Vogel wrote the play and gets credit for it, but she developed it over 7 years in really close consultation with both the director and all the performers. So every scene, every moment would have been discussed, absolutely. And that was an incredibly powerful, at that point, in dealing with his life well after the obscenity trial. And all the people who had initially been at that first reading and were telling him it was a horrible play and should be destroyed, and saying, we love you so much and we love you, we've always admired your work and please save us and get us over to the United States.
Yeah, right. In addition to the question just then about the concentration camp, she noted that it felt awkward, that scene felt awkward to her.
In reading it, or has she seen it?
Yeah, she's reading.
Reading it.
Okay, so again, I would withhold any judgment based on reading. It'd be like reading a libretto of an opera almost. Like,
Yeah, right.
the staging is just so, and as I said, it was developed. It wasn't like Paula Vogel went into her study, wrote the play, and then delivered it. She was workshopping it for 7 years, so it works incredibly well theatrically. And I don't think you really get that in the same way reading it.
That's true, yes. Didn't she use subtitles when characters are speaking in Yiddish? And the last question from me, Vogel is half Jewish, but her mother was Catholic. So interesting, you call her a Jewish playwright.
Yeah, well, that's how you want to accept that. She calls herself a Jewish playwright. Or she describes herself when she talks about that moment specifically, which is when I referred to her that way, when she said, my teacher knew I was Jewish and a lesbian. That's exactly the way she describes that scene. So whether or not, so certainly she identifies as having a Jewish background, and that's her heritage and her tradition. Yeah, but in terms, what was the other one? It was, the subtitle, yes. So yes, all the Yiddish, including the songs that are sung in Yiddish, have subtitles, so you can follow the English meaning of the songs, which is fantastic. And Vogel comes up with a really clear, she talks about this, but when you see it, it works really well. It sounds complicated, but it works well. A convention where if a character is speaking their native language, if they're speaking Yiddish, they speak without an accent in English. And then if they're speaking in English, but they are native Yiddish speakers, they speak with an accent. And it works. I think that comes across quite clearly.
Well, is there any more on Zoom?
Well, it's not a question, it's a comment. I did a little Googling and I found a PDF of the original play that I have now saved. So it will be, rather than different people emailing it to me, I will just send it as part of my weekly announcements next week. But I went through it and it looks like it's fully there.
There's an easily accessible, I mean, the play it's out of public domain, so it's definitely, you can find it. But the most easily accessible version is actually an adaptation. So be careful that it's not that.
This wasn't.
Okay, it was rewritten to take place in the 1920s. And so they call it God of Vengeance, Sholem Asch, but then it says adapted by somebody. So be sure.
95%.
And I just want to thank David and Renee and Lizzie. As David mentioned, I think at the beginning, this was originally going to be a Sisterhood Book and a Nosh event, which Renee, of course, facilitates. And because of scheduling, Lizzie offered to have this open to the congregation as our first Havdalah of the year. So thank you all, and Yasher Koach, and we all have a movie to watch.
Thank you so much. I just want to say just briefly to the Book and Nosh people that are watching that our next book is The Yiddish Policemen's Union by Michael Chabon on December 19th at 2:00. So,
If anyone wants to join.
yes, anyone who would like to join the book club discussion, get in touch with us.
And have a good night, everyone. Shavua Tov.